Hello everyone, I'm BritSimon. So I wanted to do a quick video to explain the CEAC data that has been extracted now by Xarthisius today. The CEAC data was made available last night on the stroke of midnight in Mountain Time Zone. It was a couple of hours later than we anticipated. Because I think they've moved the servers to the Mountain Time Zone rather than the Eastern Time Zone. But as soon as midnight came around, the data became available. This is the same pattern we've seen in previous years. Anyway, what's the CEAC data? Well, the CEAC data is case status for each and every case in the database for every region. So if you have an individual case, let's say your case number Africa 2020 Africa 12345, right? You can go into the CEAC database. You can type in your details. AF 12345 2020 AF 12345 is what you would enter. You drop the leading zeros, and it would give you the case status for your particular case, for that case number, one case number. So a smart guy by the name of Xarthisius, who is a previous green card winner through the DV Lottery himself, has been extracting this data for a couple of years now. We've had other smart guys that have done this for us, and they've provided the data for public use, as it were, and it's been an amazing, invaluable resource because it gives us an idea of exactly what's happening in the distribution of cases throughout all of the case number ranges. Because what Xarthisius is able to do is to get every case number, right? So when you have every case number, you can see exactly what's going on. You can see the distribution of cases, you can see the holes, you can see everything you need to see. You can see when the cases are issued, when they're sent to administrative processing, when they are just waiting to be scheduled, or they've been scheduled or refused. You can see all of that, and you can see the number of derivatives on each case and all sorts of information. Very interesting information. So I'm going to show you the data that has been extracted today. So since last night to this evening, almost 24 hours, no, it probably didn't take 24 hours, but let's say a little bit close to 20 hours, Xarthisius was running scripts to collect all this data. It would be nice if the government would give us direct access to this data. It is public data. There's no copyright infringement in doing this. There's no sort of concerns about the data. The government don't want their servers overwhelmed, and so they've implemented these captures, a capture code which ensures that a human is checking the case number. And that's really to protect their servers. It's not about protecting the privacy of the data. The data itself is not private. And if you check the CEAC website, there is a statement there that says you can use the data for public use as long as you credit the CEAC system or the government website for being the source of that data, which we're entirely happy to do. So we're not doing anything wrong extracting this data. It's publicly available information, and it's simply everybody's case number. So there's no privacy concerns. It doesn't give names. It doesn't give any personally identifiable information. Nothing of any concern. It gives case numbers. Well, as long as you're not publicizing your own case number alongside your own name and your own date of birth, etc., it's not giving us any information that is of concern at all. So let's go ahead and have a look at the data. The data itself has confirmed things that I've already said, I've already explained, but it's confirming, and perhaps it will allow people to visualize and understand what I've been saying for some months now, since July. It will perhaps let people understand how the cases are really distributed. So it's interesting. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. I'm going to show you the data on Xarthisius' site and explain how that's visualized, explain what it means, and talk through some of the main concepts. Okay, so go and get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and let's go through that now. Okay. Okay, this is the data and the visualization that we have for the data from Xarthisius. Now, here's the website where you can find this data. I'll put this link in the description below the video. And I just want to explain a few things first. So let's just demonstrate for a second the data, what it really is. I'm going to go to the spreadsheet here, and which is the data that we've got, and I'll put in a number. Let's have a look at this number, for example, SA South America 10. In GTM was the embassy issued on. This was the entry date, and this is the date the person entered the lottery back in the entry period in 2018. This was the last status date, so presumably this was the date of the interview, and in this particular case it was issued straight away for 2 people. That would be a principal applicant and a spouse typically. Now, if we go to the CEAC system, I'll show you. We're looking for SA10. I'll show you how this relates to what we're looking at here. So you put in the case number, SA, and then there would normally be some leading zeros, right? And then the number 10. Well, for the purposes of this website, to check a number, you take off the leading zeros and start with the first number that's actually a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Start with that first one, and you leave the following zeros. In other words, after the first numeric number, you leave any other zeros. Okay, so SA10 is what we're looking to check there. You put in the capture puzzle here, XK. This might have expired since I went into this. Yeah, okay, so it came up. So you can see the same information is available online for this individual case as the data that we've got extracted from Xarthisius' site. So there's derivative 1 and 2. Derivative number 01, sorry, the principal applicant is 01, the derivative is 02. And the same data there, the entry date, the last time it was updated, etc. The same data. So that's the data that we're scraping for each and every case. If we do one more just to make the point, make it very clear, we'll go in, get the next one, SA11. Right, so I can change this, change that to SA11. Now put in a different capture here, 5R, 5C. And here we can see we've got 4 people in this family. This is a obviously a principal winner, principal selectee, a derivative spouse, and 2 derivative children. That's what that means. So this one case number, SA11, has 4 people on that, and all 4 of them are issued. And if we go back to the spreadsheet data, we should see exactly the same thing as well. So yeah, there you go. SA11 has 4 issued. Now, if people have been refused, like there, we can see this case number was refused, and the number of people refused would be in there. So the number of people that are in the issued, AP, ready, refused, in transit, and transfer columns, all of those are accurate numbers of people. In the MVC column, MVC is the waiting status prior to being scheduled for an interview, and so that will always only say 1 person. That's not an accurate count. There could be more than 1 person on that particular file, on that particular case number. So that
that's just, it shows 1 because we can't see anything. If I show you what that looks like, SA3, we'll go into that case as well. Excuse me, it's fairly late at night, so I'm a little tired here. I've been out all day. So MDT 6, right, and that's what an MVC case looks like. You can ignore, if you see this, you can ignore completely this text. It's absolutely meaningless. The @NVC status, which most cases by far at this point are in this status, that's the beginning status that every case number is assigned with if it's a real case number. Okay, so ignore whatever it says here. Don't take in, you're not supposed to be paying any fees. You're not supposed to be sending any documents or anything to National Visa Center. Just ignore it completely. So because of this information, you can see we don't have the derivatives numbers here. We only know this is a single case, and that's why in the spreadsheet it shows 1. So I'm hoping you can understand that the spreadsheet information is the extraction of data from this site. It's the official data. It's from the official site. But extracted case by case and stored into a database and ultimately extracted to a comma separated values file, a CSV file, which we can visualize. We can see either in a spreadsheet like this, like I'm showing you now, or you can visualize in this wonderful site that Zarthisius has created. And so this is where you can get that file. Now you can get that file yourself. There's that file that I'm working with here, is that file, right? You can download that. If you want to know what the embassy values are, they're in this file to map a three-letter embassy code to the embassy that you know of. So Sydney, for example, would be SYD for Sydney. And so LON I think is for London, and so on. So if you want to know what the translation is between the 3-digit code you see in the file and the actual embassy name, it's in this embassy's text file. If you want the data, as I was just showing you here, which is all the data for all the regions, then you would look at the file and you can download it. If you simply want to sort of see it and understand it and see the numbers, you can look at it in this format here. This is the summarized version. So in Africa region to date, according to CEAC, there have been 1,201 issued visas, so that each one of those would either be a principal winner, a derivative spouse, or derivative child. So a total number of 1,201 issued selectees. 129 people refused, 232 on AP, and 2,583 ready. Ready meaning they are ready for interview, which we know means they submitted their DS-260 and they submitted their documents, and they're now waiting to be interviewed or have been interviewed already, but the case is not updated in CEAC yet. Asia, you can see 1,141, EU 2,000, OC 120, and South America 209. These numbers are extremely low for this point in the process. We're only with 5 months. 5 months of visa bulletins have been issued, but we've had October, November, December. We're now in January, so we've had 3 months of processing, a quarter of the processing, and only less than 10%, probably about 8% of the available visas have been issued. And then we've got some, other cases sort of ready, etc. So these numbers are extremely low. They've done a decent job in the last month of getting more cases in there, but in general, the visa bulletin needs to move a bit faster from this point forward. Okay, so what else can we see in this data? All right, so let's stay with the visualizations we're seeing here. There's the summary data there. Then you can choose a region and you can have a look at this sort of color-coded chart that explains all of the numbers. Now the color coding here gives you an idea of where there is a hole, which is the blue numbers, the blue color. No response yet, meaning the case is not yet scheduled, so there's no response. The status would be at NVC. It either means that the person has not sent in their DS260 and never will, or they've sent in their DS260 perhaps, and perhaps they've sent in their documents, but they've not been scheduled yet, either because they were late in sending in their documents if they're already current, or they're not current yet. Okay. Then there are a few in the red color there. You can just see that color there, which are refused cases. AP is that purple. In transit is pretty rare, but basically in transit is a case that has been sent to the embassy, but the embassy hasn't yet marked CEAC as them having received the case. It's the embassy that marks the case as ready. So in other words, the status goes from at NVC to a status of in transit, and then it gets to the embassy, and the embassy marks the case as ready, right? So briefly, at the end of the month, and sometimes during the middle of the month, when 2NLs have just been sent in the last couple of days, you'll see some cases showing in transit, and then those cases will be later marked as being ready. Okay, so then ready cases are the green cases which are waiting for interview or waiting for their results to be posted here, and then issued cases you can see in this sort of slightly darker green color in my case here. Let me just see if I can make that a little bit bigger so we can see this. Doesn't look so nice. Probably about there. That's a little bit bigger. So so there's the chart. This is the chart for Africa. So let me just point out a couple of things. You can see there's a massive number of holes. If I show you the DV 2019 data for Africa, same data, you can see that at least at the beginning there were far fewer holes and many more cases per thousand. We already know this. If you've watched any of my videos, if you've read my blog, you'll understand what we're talking about here. There are much more holes in this year's case ranges than there have been before, and that is why the case numbers are so high, even though the selectee numbers are somewhat similar to last year. So we've got a massive number of holes, and if you look at any of the regions, you can compare that. So this is 2019. You can see that in the beginning there was something like, let's say 30%, 35% of holes, and then there's an increasing number of holes as some countries have been cut off, right? That was the pattern, going up to about 49,000, I think 48,000 as the highest case number last year. In DV 2020, the highest case number is almost 74,000. But there's a much higher number of holes, and interestingly there are almost no cliffs or sort of graduations where it moves, where some countries have met their limits. So what this means is that no country in Africa, I believe, was artificially capped at any sort of limit, including Egypt, which is fairly unusual, and some other countries such as Ghana, etc., would normally be capped. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that the process that was used to weed out the fraudulent cases that have created the number of holes have taken a lot of the cases away from some of the high fraud countries such as Ghana. Now Ghana has a very high number of entries into the lottery normally, and subsequently gets a reasonable number of selectees but a very low number of approved cases. So what's happened this and because they had such a high number of entries, they're capped. Typically they're sort of capped and cut off at a certain point, which gives us this sort of reducing number of cases here. As countries are being capped, we see a larger number of holes in later case number ranges. Well, we're not seeing that in DV 2020, which means that Ghana and some other countries were not capped at all. Therefore, the new system that is taking out these cases and creating more holes is weeding out a higher number of cases from, let's say, Ghana than from some other country in Africa because of the high fraud levels in Africa. So it's showing that that the new system for disqualifying cases is very effective in spotting true fraudulent cases, probably through agent entries and duplicated entries and bad photos and so on. So all of those, whatever it is, we don't know how they've kept those cases out, but whatever they've done has been very successful in taking out cases and taking us down to just what I would call more genuine cases. Okay, so that's an interesting thing that we can see in this data, even for Africa here. It's flat all the way through. No more reduction in density as we go through the case number range. It's more or less flat. Okay, and if we look at Asia, in Asia you can see a cliff, two cliffs actually. So if you look at the number here at about 12,000, there's a sudden reduction in numbers, and I think what that is the cutoff for Iran. So I think Iran is cut off at around about 12,000 or just under 12,000, and Nepal seems to be cut off at just about 15,000. And so the rest of Asia. So there's a large number of holes to start with. It's around about 50-50 holes to start with, holes versus real cases to start with, and by the end of the number range, the hole rate is 85%. So in every 1,000 cases, there's only 150 real cases in each 1,000 cases when we get up here. That means that the VB can move very quickly when we get above the numbers for Nepal and Iran, because there's so few selectees in the higher number ranges. The range is very high. The highest case number is pretty high, but the progress will be fast in those later number ranges. Okay, and again, if you look at let's just have a look at Asia as a comparison. Again, you can see starting off with many less holes. There is the phenomenon of the cutoffs as the two capped countries were capped here and here, you can see that there's a similarity, but there are a lot more holes in this year's numbers. Now let's have a look at EU. EU has, again, starting off at more or less sort of 60%, 60-something% holes in Europe, going on to around about 75% on average, something like that. So around about 75. So there is a reduction here at around about 10,000. Probably I would guess, and I'm not sure, but I would guess that would be Uzbekistan, or Ukraine, the U2 countries, might be some of the Eastern European countries, but there is a sort of a slight reduction there, which means there's some sort of cap there, but it looks like there's only one capped country, maybe two, but not a dramatic reduction, so it was a sort of a subtle reduction. But you can see that we've got a lot more holes than last year. Again, if we look at the 2019 data for EU, the initial holes rate was something like 35%, and it went on to an eventual holes rate of about 66%. Again, going back here to 2020, the initial holes rate we're seeing at about 60 to 65%, and finally ending up at about 70 to 75%. So many more holes in this year. Let's have a look at South America. South America in 2020 goes all the way up to case number 4,000, and there's no country caps in this. This is a flat situation here, but with something like 50-50 holes, 50% holes, just a little bit less than 50% actually. So that's if we compare that to South America last year, almost no holes. Holes 10%, 12%, 13%, very few holes, right? And finishing off at about 1200. So in other words, we've got the similar sort of number of selectees, perhaps a few more selectees in South America this year, but many more holes. And then finally, and probably most dramatically in a sense, OC region, we can see have got a huge number of holes, and case numbers up to 2247. Now in a previous video I had guesstimated or guessed that the OC numbers were up to about case number 3000. I turned out to be incorrect on that. It's only 2247, so we're already quite well down the path towards that country going current, that region rather. It's quite amazing how quickly OC has been moving if we look at this. But contrast this, if you will, with 2019, and you can see again almost no holes, very few holes. The blue color here is the holes, until a case number of 1100 or so last year. And this year, case number 2247 is our highest number, but with many more holes. Okay, so that's a sort of a brief run through of the holes. You can, if you want to, you can look at this data by embassy. So this is showing, for example, Abu Dhabi embassy with all regions. You can select just African cases, for example, at Abu Dhabi, or Asian cases at Abu Dhabi, and you see a visualization of how many cases have been issued or are ready, etc., from each region. And people may be confused by this a little bit. The embassy itself will interview cases from any region. Even though Abu Dhabi is in the Asia region and has most cases in Asia, they also could have cases from EU, they do, cases from Africa, they certainly do, and possibly from South America. That's unlikely in Abu Dhabi, or OC, yeah, it's unlikely. But you see the point. So individuals from a particular region could be living in a different region and therefore being interviewed wherever they happen to live. And that's quite common. That does happen. So if we look at, for example, the London embassy, and we look at some of these, interesting actually, Asia region 1, EU 1, very few cases reported by London, almost none. There might be some OCs, yes there are. So very few cases have been interviewed so far in London, or have been scheduled for London. That's kind of interesting. And people have been complaining to me about Moscow. I'm amazed. I'm sounding more American as I go on. But here's the situation in Moscow. There are cases that are scheduled, that are ready, and there are some that have been put into AP, which is normal, and some issued, and almost no readies yet. But that's from all regions. Again, there could be some Africans or some Asians. Yes, there are. There are a few. OCs, none. No South America. And obviously some EU cases in Moscow. Okay, so you can have a look at that data as well, and you can have a look at that. Now, once we continue to scrape this data or get this data from Zarthisius, and I'm not quite sure how he wants to approach this, but this first collection of data was performed by automated script, and he used a paid-for service that was solving the captures for him. And he's found that's gone much faster than our human-powered effort. So that's been a useful thing to use. It has cost some money. It's cost him, a reasonable amount of money. And I need to find some way of repaying him for that, because I don't think it's fair. He's picking out that bill himself, so I need to find a way of paying that to him, or sharing the cost or something. But the point being that we may be able to continue extracting this data through automated process and not having human power as we've had in the past. So that will be interesting to see how we go on with that. But each time we are able to extract the data will be stored in the database, and we're able to use a sort of a time bar on this to see how the data changes. So if I show you that with 2019, here's the time bar. And as you can see, the first extract we got on the 6th of January 2019. This was the first extract for DV 2019 cases, and we can then see each of the extracts as we went through the year grabbed a growing amount of cases, if you see what I mean. So there was a growth pattern that happened, more and more cases getting current, getting issued, getting scheduled, etc. Until there. And you can see at the end, which the final file was September. I think actually perhaps we didn't get a final file. I have to talk to Zothisius about that, but perhaps we need to get a final file here. But there would have been a few more cases added and issued, etc. Okay, so that shows how we'll be able to see the time slice situation once we get that data. Now, going back to the 2020 data, it's definitely worth you coming to this site and having a look at this data. Keep your eye on this over the coming months, and if you are the sort of person that likes to do analysis, you can download the data yourself and analyze the data yourself and figure out where you sit. So, for example, if your case number, let's do this for someone, or let's do this for a random case. So let's say I'm in South America and I've got case number 2000, right? And I can figure out, okay, how many cases are actually in front of me, right? So if I'm case number 2000, there's case number 2000, it's at MVC, but what's my place in the line? So if I just go up there and grab all these cases, right, and I want to figure out how many cases will have to go before my case, you can see that I've highlighted 1,050 cases. So in front of me, or in front of case number 2000 in South America, there are 1,050 cases. Okay, so you can see where that particular case number belongs in a line, if you like. How many cases are in front of that case number and how many cases are behind. So if you have access to the data, which we all do, you can figure out exactly where you belong. So all you need to do is download that file, open it in a spreadsheet as I have here, put on a filter on the regions, etc., and take out the cases that have a status of none, because those cases are the holes. Okay, so if I put those back in for a minute, you can see this case number here, AS2, that's a hole. There is not a real case. There is no one there. If I go back to, this is SA2, right? So if I go back to, it's disconnected there, but it will reconnect. If I go back to CEAC, SA2, oh, my capture's gone there. I need to refresh that. Oh, I think the whole thing is just disconnected. I'll have to go back in there. Yeah. So 2020 SA2. I'll put in the code ME4 CU. Right. So I'm checking that case, and it says your search did not return any data because it's a hole. It's not a real case. This is a case where someone was selected, and prior to the announcements of the results, the case was disqualified for a reason we don't know, right? But that particular case was disqualified and weeded out by whatever fraud detection technology they have in place. So that could be because of a duplicate entry or an agent entry where it's obviously fraudulent. Could be a bad photo, anything of that nature. And so those are holes, and we've got many more holes this year, as you're seeing, than in previous years. Okay, so that's how the holes look when we're actually searching for those. So if you want to have a look at the data, turn on a filter, reconnecting. Turn on a filter to this. Yes, reload. That's taking its sweet time. I may have connectivity problems here. I don't know. Oh, there you go. And just turn off the status where status is equal to none. This is going to take a little time to load up. It's 170,000 rows of data at the moment because of all the holes that were in that amount of data. Okay, while that's loading, let me just show you something else here. I had previously, back in July, I posted this article, which was a selectee number analysis, and over the recent months I've been telling people, go and have a look at my articles from July. If they ask me about cases, etc., and they want to know about my analysis, I've said, okay, go and have a look at the archive, and I'll show you how to do this now since we're talking about it. So you click the archive, you come back here and you can see every article on my blog back in time, right? And you can scroll down to around about the middle of July, and you can see a number of articles I wrote when the selectee numbers were released. Then I did some analysis. And predictions, etc. I explained the draw process, which shows or explains why there are holes, and so on and so forth. A bunch of really good articles here that really would be smart to have a look at. So if you look at the selectee number analysis article, which is the one that I was just showing, you'll see in there that I made some guesses, and it was purely guesswork at the time, to see how many cases there would be. So I had the official selectee numbers there, and I guessed on a derivative rate, a starting derivative rate, and calculated how many cases I thought there would be and what the highest case number I thought there would be, right? So what I've done is I've taken that data and I've put that into another spreadsheet here. These are the regions, and as you can see, I've put in the selectee official numbers. I took my guessed derivative rate from that particular article back in July, guessed cases, and guessed high number. The guessed high number I got from people posting their case number, etc. on my site when they were selected, and I made a note every so often of the highest case numbers I heard of, and pretty much I got those fairly close. I'll show you in a moment. But I then guesstimated or estimated the number of cases that there would be within the selectees. So if you imagine the average number of people per case number, so in other words, a winner and a spouse would be 2, a winner, a spouse, and a child would be 3, right? The average, there are some single people, but the average varies per region, actually varies per country, but the average certainly varies per region. So depending on the mix of the selected entrants, there could be a different derivative rate each year. So I guessed, with the best information I had at the time, which was based on previous years, I guessed the derivative rate to guess the number of cases that we have, and I used that to hypothesize the fact that we must have more holes, as you can now see is certain. Okay. Now as it turned out, I was inaccurate on these derivative rates. I've calculated the actual derivative rates per region based on the data we now have. I can see the number of actual cases in each region by checking the spreadsheet data that I was just showing you. And I can see the actual high case number for each region. Okay, so based on the actual number of cases and the selectees, I was able to work back to the derivative number there. So this is the number of derivatives per case on average. Okay, so it turned out I was low on my derivative number, and therefore I had a low number on the number of cases in most regions. So I was pretty accurate on OC, let's say. I was fairly accurate on South America, 15,800, so pretty inaccurate on Europe, fairly close on Asia, and Africa. I was understated. It's actually just over 20,000 cases. But no matter what the number of cases is, the selectee count is the same. The only thing I would say is that I'm expecting all regions, particularly Africa, Asia, and Europe, to have an increase in derivative rate as people get married and have kids and things. Those numbers will grow. So we'll actually end up with more selectees than we start off with, right? And then here are the high case numbers based on the extracted data from CEAC. These are the actual highest case numbers we've found. These are it. So if you've got a case number higher than these case numbers, let me know, because I'd like to know how that's happened. But generally speaking, what we did was Xarthisius sets up the extract to go to a higher number than we expect, and it continues pulling. And if it's come back now. So for South America, for example, if I turn on the holes, let me just do that. Wow, it's really slow. Come on. Okay, I'm going to try and turn on this whole thing in a moment, but the whole thing is just working very slow. Okay. Try it again in a moment. Dear me, that's really... It's got so much data there. I'm working on a Google Sheets spreadsheet, so it's behaving very, very slowly. Okay, so I'll add back in the holes, which are the status none. Put those back in. Go down to the end of the file, and you can see that Xarthisius actually extracted every single case number up to case number 5,000, but they were all holes after case number 4,000. So if I just scroll back to case number 4,000, they're all, just quickly go there, they're all holes until we get to case number 4,000, that one. That's the highest case in South America. And you can see there's, holes in between the numbers here. Okay, so in each region, Xarthisius set the number higher than he expected, and by that way he's managed to get the highest case number. And these are those actual numbers that we find for each region. So 2247 in OC, 4,000 in South America, 55,271 in Europe, 31,565 in Asia, and 73,269 in Africa. So those are the actual highest case numbers, and these are all pretty close to what I had in terms of estimates. I had slightly higher numbers in some cases. Actually, I had quite dramatically high in Oceania for some reason. I must have seen somebody must have reported having a case number close to 3,000. And maybe it was a misunderstanding or something, because it doesn't exist. So anyway, these are the actual highest case numbers. So if you want to know where you are in terms of your region, you can certainly look at the file and figure that out from the file that's there. I know people are going to ask me to do that for them. Honestly, I don't have time to do that for everybody. I just don't have time. So please have a go and do that yourself. All right, so excuse me. Okay, so enjoy the data. I think that's probably as much as I've got to say at the moment, but go and have a look at the data, enjoy the data, have a look at previous years and compare. Frankly, thanks very much to Zarthesius for putting the effort in on rewriting the program for this, and then paying to solve all these captures so that we can get this data. It's a tremendous thing. Okay, there was one last thing I wanted to do, which was to show. Let me just show you this. BritSimon. This is how you search for data. You just type in BritSimon and then let's see, CEAC status. You type in, if you want to search for information, you can type in BritSimon and then any information you want into Google, and it will search for you. So if you're wondering what these case statuses mean, this is at MVC. This is in the FAQ, my FAQ frequently asked questions, so you can go and have a look at that. Each of the statuses is described: in transit, ready, issued, refused, AP, and then we talk about the derivative numbers. Okay, so so go and have a look at that by all means, and you'll understand that data a little bit better. All right. So I hope that's helpful to everybody. Over the coming days, we'll be able to do a little bit more analysis on this and figure out how we're doing. And this will give us, now we can extract the data and we can see how many cases are scheduled for interview each month. We'll be able to better predict the visa bulletin increases and understand how we are moving towards the maximum number of visas that could be issued, the quotas for each region, and so on. All right, so this will be very useful to have that data. All right, Happy New Year to everyone. It's late on the evening of the first of the year, so it's time for me to hit the sack and leave you to enjoy this data. All right, bye bye now.